Freeform has given us quite a bunch of interesting shows in the past. We've had The Fosters, we've had Shadowhunters, we had that uplifting rehab show. Freeform is doing pretty good for themselves, whether you want to admit it or not. Now, the new show is pretty much called Beyond. Now, is Beyond good? Is it bad? Does it need to go beyond the stars, kind of fall into a big pile of shit? Well, here's the thing, to me. Beyond is a good show on one hand, but then it's also a bad show on the other, and a little bit convoluted, right? So let's talk about this. This show is a little bit of a mix between the movie The Signal, if you actually know what I'm talking about, The X-Files, Stranger Things, and maybe just a dash of Jumper, all rolled up into one big, fat, juicy burrito, right? So, does this show actually do those things good? Does it do it better? No, not really. It doesn't do it better than those things, but it actually does it decent enough to the point where you actually find yourself a little bit intrigued to the end. Now, the best thing about this entire premiere, whatever it may be, right, is that it's the premise. Now, I feel like the premise is definitely the best part, and the mystery surrounding about Holden's coma is actually the best part of this entire premiere. The problem is, I feel like the show does kind of lean on this premise and the mystery a little bit too much like a crutch, to the point where you don't really find anybody else interesting per se, and none of the characters are really well developed, to the point where you don't really give a shit about Holden per se. You only give a shit about Holden's kind of like disappearance and his mystery. And that's kind of like one of the main problems I kind of have going forward. I mean, like, legitimately, the mystery is so kind of like leaned upon to the point where you cannot have a scene in this entire show without Holden or his coma or whatever it may be kind of constantly being brought up, and you don't get a chance for the family or his friend or whatever it may be to like build up on some of these relationships. Now, at the very beginning, the character development of Holden starts off young. Same thing with his friend, and that's good. We get to set him up. The problem is you don't really get to set this guy up very long. You get about 5, maybe 8 minutes or whatever it may be with Holden, and then we're magically supposed to give a shit about this guy because he's now in a coma. Bad mistake. I would have preferred that they would have put, you know, young Holden for about an hour, and then maybe make the second hour, which is a part of their premiere, about, you know, older Holden kind of dealing with the situations. Now, the 12-year gap between the coma does add for some interesting type of awkward situations, but also adds for some very lazy writing to just kind of be like, hey, look, that's kind of awkward funny for the most part. And it does kind of work a bit, but that is what it is. Some nitpicks I could pretty much say, just simply put, at the very beginning, his friend, brother is like dressed up like a gangster, and he looks like he's picked right out of a different type of show, like he's pulled straight out of Compton. And that's pretty much the basic thing. Now, overall, they talk about subconscious, right, later on in the plot. And I feel like that's kind of interesting per se. But the problem is, I feel like that also seems like this is something a little bit convoluted, to the point where maybe they're talking about too many things a little bit ahead of time. And I feel like this is the type of show that once the mystery is solved, then I feel like it's going to blow its load very quickly, and not a lot of people are going to really give a shit about it going forward. Now, overall, I found myself, like I said, intrigued, and I found myself actually wanting to get to the end, but it's not necessarily because of the characters, because everybody else is pretty bland. It's a basic mother and father, basic, you know, brother, basic friend, even though he's black, and he maintains to be a pussy from the young age to an adult. That's pretty much the basic thing. Overall, I feel like there's something more beyond the premise that we kind of see here, but I feel like it's also one of these type of shows that, and you probably know what I'm talking about, that pretty much is going to shoot their load very quickly, and then by the time you know it, it's just going to kind of falter, and a lot of people are not going to really care. I would recommend you probably binge watch this thing, to me personally, just to begin with, even though because you can see on an app or whatever it may be. I recommend you binge it, because it seems like the type of show that if you wait week to week, you may actually kind of get bored and you start to kind of forget about it, and then you just don't really give a shit. So I recommend you binge it, then find yourself interested or not, and then that's kind of how you decide. But overall, it's a decent enough show, and I do find myself, like I said, once again, intrigued. But that's about it. There's only intrigue here. There's not really any interesting characters. At least not at first glance. It may improve, it may not. But then again, that is up to them. Comment, subscribe, and like if you actually enjoyed this review. You can actually share this shit if you actually enjoyed it. Or just share it just to begin with. That can really help. I'm Chris Smith, and I'm signing out.